Hey guys, it's Ken Maxfield, otherwise known as the Hide Guy, and I am the owner and president of the Maxfield Report. And here's my recap for the week ending March the 8th. The week started with Packers having a mixed bag of offers. The reason I say it's mixed, as expected, Packers, who had people traveling this past week in Asia, chose not to offer to the public, allowing those who were traveling to offer to the customers they were visiting. While those Packers who still were at home and no one traveling came out with offers that were basically unchanged with the week prior. Was a little bit surprising, especially considering most people felt that the Packers really haven't sold a lot of hides since about the middle of January. A lot of people, including myself, were looking to see maybe a few more hides offered and certainly more selections offered. So interesting that no change there. As far as interest to start the week, things were pretty decent at the first half of the week as far as the number of bids that were out there. We had heard from multiple sources that they may even had more containers bid overnight Tuesday than they had seen in the last 3 years. That didn't pertain to everyone in the trade, though, as we did have others who had said that they really didn't see any improvement in the number of bids. But overall, it seemed like most buyers were coming in, bidding at prices lower than asking prices, as the general perception amongst tanners is that there are a number of producers around the world that have more than ample supplies of hides they want to sell and can likely not only sell them, but sell them in volume at lower prices and be able to ship them relatively prompt. As the week progressed, the counters went out. I would say somewhere between 40 to 50%, maybe even 60% of the bids out there were withdrawn once they were countered at the asking prices of the Packers. There was some business concluded at steady levels middle of the week. However, by the time the week started to come to a close yesterday, some of the people who were getting steady levels were already willing to book levels $1 lower than they were selling at earlier in the week. So this underlying pressure we've been talking to you about for quite some time appears to be growing, and it's certainly building. And I think they're starting to feel some pressure. In the meantime, there's lots of rumors of people who are traveling, offering behind the scenes very quietly to some of their preferred customers. And it's speculated that there has been a number of these special offers, which means that the offers are in volume and at prices lower than what's being reported on our price guide. We affectionately like to call that farting underneath the covers. And I think there was a lot of that going on here, especially the second half of this week. So always tough to get a read as to how many hides have traded when those things happen. I am of the opinion that, and it wouldn't be hard to do, but I think we certainly sold more than what we saw on yesterday's export report, which we'll touch upon in a little bit, and maybe even double what we saw this on yesterday's report. So end of the day, I think the market is a very precarious steady, if not slightly or incrementally lower at the end of the week. As far as cowhides go, a very similar story. People who were traveling, their people back in the office did not offer to the public, while those who did not have anybody traveling had offers unchanged with the week prior. Decent number of bids, doesn't pertain to everybody. Some people are saying they saw no improvement in the number of bids, but like the big Packer hides, there hasn't. Most people were looking for steady. Bids were lower than ask. Negotiations back and forth. There has been some trading at steady levels. The highlight is native dairy cows even brought a little more money because those are in short supply and there's quite a bit of demand out there. So those who have dairy cows appear as if they're able to get steady to even $1 higher than their last trade, which is good news for that. As it pertains to natives, even a little better interest on the native dairy cow. In fact, we had prices up slightly higher than the week prior, while on branded cows, there really wasn't that much activity, trading at steady levels. But at the end of the day, sellers were able to avoid taking any less money. As far as the number of hides that were sold last week, we are of the opinion that it obviously has to be better than last week, as we mentioned a couple of minutes ago, although I'm not quite sure if the producers have cleared their production, especially keeping in mind that the number of cows in the harvest mix is running at some of the highest percentages it has in the last few years. And it's a very good chance we're going to see probably the largest cow harvest of the year this week once numbers are released on Monday. Going around the globe, our friends from Europe continue to talk about the pressure facing male hides. Reliable sources tell us that trading is going to come off again in the likelihood of more than €1, probably a couple of euros as much. Trading on cow hides seem to have stabilized, reflecting what's going on in the United States. And trading on ox heifer is a bit of a mixed bag. Again, depends on travelers. Appears that they may take a little less, while those who are not traveling are still trying their best to hold prices steady. But overall, the perception of the trade is there's still a number of European producers who have more than ample unsold supplies of hides, and they're looking for business. Going down to Brazil, no change in prices, but we have heard from reliable sources there is a couple of very large Brazilian wet blue producers traveling in China this past week, pushing hard to get sales. In fact, a couple of the very large tanners were approached by these people and very bluntly putting it to them that they need sales in order to generate some cash flow. They've been buying hides, putting them into blue, not selling enough product, and some of these guys are starting to feel the crunch on the cash flow. So I think that these people who are traveling are desperate for sales and are going to write some business, and it's very likely that they're probably going to take less than the last reported levels, although we can't confirm it as of this broadcast. Going over to Australia, really no change over there. Harvest levels are picking up a little bit again because the rains have stopped. That's allowed more cattle to come to harvest. Suppliers report a bit of a mixed bag. Of course, producers are trying their best to push prices higher. However, the global tone of the market is prohibiting any real noticeable advancement in prices. There are continued efforts by buyers to buy prices or to buy hides lower, I should say. And right now they're being refused on the surface, but then again, with the undertone of the softer undertone of the market, I think that there's probably a pretty good chance we saw prices trade a little lower, just have not been reported to the trade as of now. As I mentioned, the USDA export report came out yesterday. The report was very disappointing in the terms of sales. There was only 272,000 wet salted hides sold. For the first time in recent memory, China did not lead the sales of wet salted hides. That was taken over by Korea with 119,000 purchased, while China came in at 97,000. So a very poor week of sales for wet salted hides. Sales of wet blue hides were 104,000 roughly. That is obviously not clearing a week's of production for producers. So overall, about 375 in the sales, much lower than what most people were expecting, as I think the popular opinion was it'd be somewhere closer the week prior, 450, maybe even tickling 500. So shipments, another decent week of shipments, which is good for producers because obviously they need to keep product moving if they're not selling it. So 379,000 wet salted hides shipped. We saw another 186,000 wet blue. So 2 weeks of good shipments. That's a positive, but it's not enough in order to justify higher prices. The number glaring at us on today's report, or excuse me, on Thursday's report, I should say, was the outstanding sales at 2.4 million. That's even lower than last week. We had pointed out in our commentary last week that was one of the lowest we've seen in recent memory, and it's not very conducive to being sold forward for producers as they're entering the APLF next week. The harvest last week came in at 603. That is identical to last week. It was 599 a year ago if you're keeping score at home. We are actually 16,000 behind last year. However, keep in mind, there was one extra day of harvest last year versus this year. So technically we would be ahead. We are still forecasting that we will see a number at the end of the year up 1 to 1.5%, as there's plenty of cattle standing, and we believe that their packers will continue to bring them to harvest as we go forward. Looking ahead, Obviously, next week's the APLF. We will be there. If any of our members would like to catch up to us, we would welcome the opportunity to sit down, have a cup of coffee with you or a soda. Just either reach out to me by text or email or call me. My phone will be working in Asia. As far as next week, as our expectations, we tend to believe that there already has been sales concluded at the end of last week, very quietly, likely at lower levels. We feel that there's producers needing to sell. There's the underlying pressure in the market is building. The producers are trying their best to hold the market together prior to the show, not wanting to take less money. So I still think if we see prices change, there's a much better chance of them going lower before they go higher. That's it for now. We'll be broadcasting from Hong Kong next week. Until then, please check out my website, www.themaxfieldreport.com. I offer free 14-day trials. We'll talk to you next week.